Він дуже поважає військових, але об'єднав всю Україну.
Yeah, I saw news about the Russian anti-aircraft system intercepted the plane with the other passengers and Prigozhin and his deputy, and the video where the plane was falling down.
Спочатку не вірила, поки там уже...
First I didn't believe it, but then when I saw lots of confirmation from different sources, especially from Russian sources, I thought that it's probably true.
So even if he's alive, and nobody knows that, there is this information which impacts how Russian elites think about Putin, about Ukraine. For us, it may be an inspiration, but for what is happening in the discourse of Russian elites, because it may make them fear about their future, fear Putin, not believe in him. It may undermine his authority, and that's what matters. And our strategical goal is to divide them.
Yeah.
So I believe that his attempted coup, as well as his death, started some irreversible processes in the Russian elites, which will ultimately lead to some beneficial results for us.
So it's just past 8 p.m. and I'm standing at the back of a long queue to enter the immigration office at Przemysl train station in Poland before I board an 11.5-hour overnight sleeper train to Kyiv in Ukraine.
That's Liam Mendes. He's a reporter with The Australian.
This is one of the main ways people get in and out of Ukraine, and there's a young mother with her son who's probably about 14 years old, and she was frantically rushing with her bags. Now, the trains going to Kyiv often sell out a week in advance, but she'd managed to snag a ticket on the day for a heavy premium. We start talking and I ask her whether she'd heard the news.
Breaking news, we do have confirmation in just the last few moments that Wagner Group boss Yevgeny Prigozhin, who led that mutiny against Vladimir Putin's rule 3 months ago, is dead. Russia's aviation authority has confirmed he was on board that plane that crashed.
She hadn't heard the news, and I'd never seen someone have such an extreme reaction. Her eyes lit up and a huge beaming smile takes over her face. I'm not exaggerating. She literally begins to jump up and down for joy, clapping and laughing. I was really taken aback by this.
Prigozhin was the notorious leader of the Wagner paramilitary group. He was exiled to Belarus following an attempted coup against Russian President Vladimir Putin. Last week, Russian media reported a plane carrying 10 passengers, including Prigozhin, plunged to earth in the Tver region. There's a reason Liam was intrigued by the reaction of the woman at the train station. On the one hand, Prigozhin's death represents a kind of victory for the people of Ukraine who've been at war with Russia for more than 500 days. Prigozhin and his troops were the architects of Russia's only real battlefield advancements during the war. His troops, mercenaries and Russians freed from the country's jails to fight, were notorious for effective fighting and horrendous acts of violence against Ukrainian troops, civilians, and even Wagner's own fighters. The short-lived rebellion by Prigozhin's mercenaries exposed cracks in Putin's facade. But in Ukraine, residents are treating the news with trepidation.
As we know, there's a tremendous amount of resilience among the Ukrainian people. But they're not partying in the street. There's no buzz or excitement over this news. There's this sort of silent optimism where I think they believe it might have an impact on Russia, but they're not exactly sure of the extent of that impact.
For many of the people Liam has talked to since he arrived in Ukraine, that's a bridge too far. Plenty don't actually believe Prigozhin is dead.
I started talking to people young and old, and the difference in their thoughts of Prigozhin's death was really interesting. They were divided according to age. The older people believed what Russian media was reporting and said that the footage of his plane falling out of the sky was enough proof for them. But younger people tended to be a lot more sceptical about his death.
This is not the first time Prigozhin is rumoured to have died. In 2019, he was rumoured to have been killed in a plane crash in Congo while undertaking Wagner's African mercenary operations as a de facto Russian fighting force. That turned out to be false, but it's left plenty of room for doubt. Dmytro Soldatenko is a 22-year-old university student from Kyiv. He's studying a Masters of International Law. Reporter Liam Mendes spoke with Dmytro as celebrations for Ukraine's Independence Day were underway in Kyiv, and as news spread that Wagner paramilitary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin was dead.
I looked for further reports. It could easily be just fake news. I think it's primarily about Russian official statements.
Yes.
Because it's closely connected to the Russian policy. And it's not the fact that Prigozhin was killed, but how is it publicly pronounced. So even if he's alive, and nobody knows that, there is this information which impacts how Russian elites think about Putin, about Ukraine.
So even if it's not certain as to whether he's dead or not, you think that the news that he is dead is still really important for Ukraine?
For us, it may be an inspiration, but for what is happening in the discourse of Russian elites, because it may make them fear about their future, fear Putin, not believe in him. It may undermine his authority, and that's what matters. And our strategical goal is to divide them.
Yeah.
So I believe that his attempted coup, as well as his death, started some irreversible processes in the Russian elites, which will ultimately lead to some beneficial results for us.
It's easy to see why Ukrainians like Dmytro have questions about the veracity of claims about Prigozhin's death. Wagner initially said the plane was downed by a surface-to-air missile, pointing the finger at Russia. US officials have said they believe the wreck was caused by an assassination plot, but said it was more likely that a bomb exploded on board or that some other kind of sabotage was responsible. Here's Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder.
Well, our initial assessment is that it's likely Prigozhin was killed. We're continuing to assess the situation. We don't have any information to indicate right now the press reporting stating that there was some type of surface-to-air missile that took down the plane. That we assess that information to be inaccurate.
The problem is the Americans can't get close enough to investigate for themselves and have stressed that their assessment is incomplete. For its part, the Kremlin denied it's responsible for the crash, but announced yesterday Prigozhin's death had been confirmed through genetic testing.
Authorities say DNA testing has been successful at identifying all passengers on board the crash.
So, did Putin murder Prigozhin? This is a former close ally and friend, despite their strangely parallel lives. While Putin was rising through the Russian intelligence service, Prigozhin was in a prison camp. He went on to own a catering firm and became widely known as Putin's chef before taking control of the powerful military group that was seen by the global intelligence community as Putin's private army. Since Wagner's attempted march on Moscow, Putin has stated more than once that he's unwilling or unable to forgive Prigozhin's betrayal. Nasty things tend to happen to Vladimir Putin's enemies, everything from multi-storey falls to poisoning.
In 2006, Putin had pushed a law through parliament allowing the KGB to kill traitors outside Russia. Months later, Alexander Litvinenko lay dead in London, the KGB defector poisoned with radioactive polonium.
Dmytro, for one, will keep an open mind.
As well as my logic tells me, it seems like it is. But I would not be surprised if he like appears somewhere in Argentina or Africa years after the war.